Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1277, Fourth Step. Sunny had suffered to lure the Azure Serpent to the surface, but there was a good reason to guide the mad beast there. Two reasons, even, Saint and Nephi's. Although neither of them was as capable of fighting the abomination in the water as Sunny was, they could still play an important role in the battle. It was just that he had to create an opportunity for them to do so. And he had. As Sunny was convulsing from pain, two arrows struck the raging Leviathan. One was entirely black, as if forged out of pure darkness. Which it was. Augmented both by her Mantle of Darkness and Blade of Darkness abilities, as well as the enhancement of the stifled scream, Saint's arrow pierced the Azure Serpent's one remaining eye. It was the darkest hour of the night, and so her strength was at its peak. More than that, this first shot she sent was empowered by the dreadful destructiveness of the Death Dealer enchantment, and so it delivered the most damage. And yet, the giant eye of the ancient Leviathan still wasn't destroyed. It was only damaged, becoming painted red, which made the mad beast look even more menacing. Sunny had put a lot of hope into this first salvo, but he was left disappointed. It didn't matter, though. During their violent ascent, he had been strategically trying to place himself on the side of the Azure Serpent where it was blind. However, there was no advantage to be gained there. Whatever senses the enemy was using to perceive his movements were perfect and precise, even without vision. His plan to blind the mad beast had been meaningless from the start. The second arrow was white. Its impact was not nearly as forceful as that of the first arrow, but it was still quite ferocious. Nephi's had always used a sword, but it was simply a preference. As a legacy, she had been trained in the use of all kinds of weapons, and that certainly included bows. There was a powerful memory longbow in her soul arsenal, crafted by the Forge Masters of Valor, and several enchanted arrows as well. But even then, the white arrow barely managed to pierce the flesh of the Azure Serpent despite sliding faithfully into an already existing wound, where the azure scales and the tough skin of the Leviathan had already been torn open by the dark butterfly. The damage was negligible. That was just as expected, too. Neph's goal was not to wound the great beast with her arrows, instead, it was to deliver the black venom from the overflowing bitter cusp into its flesh. She coated the arrowheads with the toxin before each shot. One dose of the black venom was not going to affect the Azure Serpent much, but 10, 20, or 30 could weaken it. Perhaps. Sunny did not expect Saint and Nephi's to bring the mad beast down. After all 5 shadows and all the soul flame were augmenting him, and him alone, he was the only one with the ability to truly damage the abomination. But they had to harass and weaken it so that he could deliver a fatal strike. It seemed to be working. The 2 arrows had not seriously wounded the Azure Serpent, but they had distracted it for a second. That second was enough for Sunny to shake off the terrible pain of having his soul damaged and slightly repair his shell. Letting out a wrathful hiss, he shot forward and bit into the side of the Leviathan. Even though the shadow shell had no taste buds, he could swear that he sensed the salty taste of blood on his tongue. That taste drove him into a frenzy. Devour. I am going to devour you. I am going to rip you apart. Forgetting the pain, forgetting the suffering, Sunny pressed his mighty jaws together in an attempt to savage and mutilate his enemy. It was only through an incredible effort that he forced himself to maintain control and let go, dashing aside just in time to avoid being trapped and crushed in the coils of the Azure Serpent's colossal body. A drop of cold fear fell into the incinerating inferno of his fury. This is dangerous. Battling a great beast was already perilous enough. But the act of assuming the shape and form of a nightmare creature, of diving into its mind and heart so deeply, was in and of itself a great danger. Sunny had used shadow dance to read abominations before, but he had never tried to manifest himself into one of them. It was too easy to get lost in that state, maybe forever. Even the true name was not a panacea. He also had to maintain his sense of self, while simultaneously denying it. Maybe this was the fourth step of shadow dance. The ability to preserve his identity while becoming truly formless in mind, body, and soul, and thus infinitely malleable, like all shadows were. As Sunny nimbly dodged the attacks of the Azure Serpent and lashed out with his sharp fangs and crushing tail, more arrows fell from the darkness. Saint was not using Death Dealer anymore, instead trying to weigh the Leviathan down with the help of Burden of Peace. Nephi's was continuing to poison the great beast with the toxin of the bitter cusp. However, the abomination had quickly grown impatient with their harassment. Its movements changed slightly, and the next time the two shot their bows, a tall wave suddenly rose, washing the arrows away. That gave Sunny an opportunity to deliver a vicious blow, however. Coiling himself around a mangled span of the azure serpent's body, he slithered forward. His sharp dorsal fin bit into the mad beast's flesh, shredding it like a saw. The soft glow of the brightening water was suddenly painted in a crimson hue. Die, die, die. I am going to kill you. The azure serpent growled and lunged at him, madness burning in its bleeding eye. It was probably thinking the same. Chapter 1278, Mutual Destruction. The great river was foaming and seething, gargantuan waves rising from its softly glowing expanse to crash into the weathered slopes of the crumbling island. Two dark silhouettes, one colossal, the other merely giant, were moving through the raging water, intertwined in a murderous battle. Sunny had been driven mad by pain and bloodlust. He lost count of the number of blows his obsidian, serpentine body had endured. He also did not know how many times he retaliated, biting the flesh and breaking the scales of the azure serpent. His mantle was in shambles, the living stone failing miserably to keep up with the barrage of devastating attacks he had to endure. The fearsome onyx armor was cracked and shattered, revealing the glossy black scales beneath. Many of its segments were entirely destroyed. The shadow shell that it was encasing had been shredded and ravaged, as well. Giant wounds were gaping on it, bleeding shadows. He had been able to repair some of the damage at first, but having the means to do something like that. It seemed so distant now. There was one thing that filled Sunny with dark glee, though. It was that the azure serpent looked no better than him. The body of the great beast had already been grotesquely mangled before their battle, and now, it was in an even worse state. The wounds that had closed were reopened. The wounds that had been opened were now wider and more harrowing, with crimson blood flowing out of them into the radiant water. Dozens of arrows were sticking out of the abomination's scarlet flesh. Some of them weighed it down, some sent a deadly toxin circulating through its bloodstream. But the azure serpent's eyes still burned with the same madness. Good. Ah. Good. Don't you give up on me, old snake. Sunny wanted to kill the hateful beast, but he didn't want the death to be swift. No, he wanted his enemy's agony to last forever. He wanted to tear its flesh with his fangs forever, feel the shudders of pain pulsing through its body forever, hear its pained cries forever. Control yourself. Snapping out of the consuming madness, he reminded himself of his goal. He needed to kill the azure serpent as fast as possible, not only because his essence was not limitless, but also because the chances of him being killed by the great beast were much higher than the other way around. If there was the smallest chance, he had to take it. It was just that. There were no chances. Still, there were none. The mad beast was still in full control of both itself and the battlefield. The water flowed and twisted to aid it and constrain Sunny, as if obediently following the ancient serpent's commands. Even with its body looking like that of a battered corpse and its mind flooded with pain, the azure serpent remained fixated on the solitary goal of destroying its opponent with a truly insane level of focus. But Sunny could feel his mind growing muddled, and his reason wavering. Oh. I can't go on much longer. For the first time since he had assumed the shape of the onyx serpent, the cold realization that defeat was possible entered his consciousness. The thought was so incongruous with the essence of his monstrous form that the shadow shell almost came undone. He held on to his maddening fury and pushed the thoughts of defeat away. Defeat was not possible. Such a thing did not exist. He would never lose. He would not lose again. That last thought was slightly strange, as if it was not his own. Grinding his fangs, Sunny pushed his enormous body through the hostile water, aiming to ram the side of the twisting leviathan. He knew that the battle had already turned in his enemy's favor. So, he needed to do something to balance the scales. But what? The onyx serpent raged as it burned with the mad desire to destroy his enemy. However, Sunny was also calm and cool-headed. What advantages did he have that the great beast did not possess? Both of them were already half dead. He had to kill the enemy. But being killed by the enemy seemed inevitable instead. So, then. The two outcomes were not necessarily mutually exclusive. Being killed did not directly stand in the way of achieving his goal. It was only the timing of his death that was the issue. Sunny was filled with an indescribable, furious determination to slay the Azure Serpent. Nothing mattered in front of this hatred and this consuming need. Least of all death. It would be all worth it if he could just feel the life leaving his enemy's bleeding body. Mutual destruction. Yes. Yes, he liked it. He liked it a lot. This was the advantage he so desperately needed. Dangerous flames ignited in Sunny's onyx eyes as he twisted his long neck and glared at the reeling serpent. The great beast must have been growing weaker, as well. His attacks and the arrows of his companions were slowly grinding down its boundless endurance. The abomination had been a split second too late and failed to evade being rammed by Sunny's serpentine head. Which finally gave him the chance. First, the water. The water had been constraining Sunny, and so, he had to wrestle the control of it from the Azure Serpent first. With his understanding of the great beast and the experience of watching Neve and Bloodwave fight, he could achieve dominance for a few moments, at least. Coiling his mighty body like a spring, Sunny shot forward with incredible speed. He moved it in a specific way, forcing a powerful current to rush outward and collide with the opposing one, which had been created by the ancient Leviathan. A great whirlpool appeared where the two currents collided, and he tore through it, unopposed. Second, the target. The target was the Azure Serpent's titanic spine. Sunny had to sever it no matter what. Usually, the spine would have been protected by layers of impenetrable muscle, a layer of impervious skin, and a dreadful armor of indestructible scales. But the mad beast had been mangled and mutilated by the long weeks of warding off marauding abominations and the eerily monstrous butterfly. Large chunks of its flesh were missing, revealing bone. At a particular spot just below its head, a long span of the spine was revealed, too. That was a good target to choose, especially because the abomination would not be able to use its jaws to defend it. And, lastly, the advantage. Sunny did indeed possess an advantage in the battle of mutual destruction. It was because the Azure Serpent was made of flesh, while he was made of shadows. If he sustained too much damage, the shadow shell was going to fall apart. But his incarnation, which was small and hidden in its depths, could survive. It was just a matter of luck. Either he would be destroyed along with the shell, or get lucky and remain alive. But regardless of the outcome, the hateful Leviathan would die. I am fine with that. Growling viciously, the black serpent shot through the shining waters of the great river, and, discarding all pretenses of defense, closed his jaws on the great beast's spine.